In the world of video games, you don't have to look far to see botched releases, with games overpromising and under-delivering. But thankfully, this phenomenon isn't particularly common, at least at this point, in the guitar world. You can't really overpromise a distortion pedal, and a valve amp is a valve amp. But with the ever-increasing list of digital modelers, the plague of overpromising and under-delivering is starting to rear its head. And sadly, a case of this can be seen with the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. Neural DSP were founded in 2017, and while relatively new, they are far from inexperienced, with one co-founder being the founder of Dark Glass Electronics, known for their bass pedals and bass amps, with the other co-founder working for Dark Glass. But Neural DSP were going to be the guitar-focused company, and quickly built a name for themselves in the field of plugins, software that emulates amplifiers on a desktop computer. There were notable amp brand collaborations and artist collaborations, and a plugin ranges from about €100 all the way up to €180. And these were a huge success because while many might not be able to afford a Soldano or a Fortin amp, they could probably afford a plugin of a Soldano or a Fortin amp. So the plugins were a major success. People bought and continue to buy multiple plugins from Neural, and now what have you got? Well, an existing customer base who are invested in your product and your ecosystem. So what can you offer them? At NAMM 2020, Neural released the Quad Cortex, marketed as the most powerful floor modeler on the planet. Quite the claim, but it was true, and it was what everybody was talking about at the time. It was super hyped up, and it resulted in 2,000 pre-order unit sales just from the NAMM prototypes and the promises of what this unit could do. But some promises, years later, are yet to be kept. A warning sign might have been that some of the promises that Neural were making felt a little overexcited, like mentioning how the amount of amps, IRs and effects will grow for eternity. Or that
as we go along, this is going to be, it's basically going to be updated for life.
Yeah. Wow, it's quite a commitment.
You can say that again, but the promised features that are missing are actually the ones that were far more believable, like the ability to run the Neural plugins that you bought on this hardware device. That makes perfect sense for the existing customer base who are invested in this product line. If they like those sounds, they can use them live. Pretty cool. And this really was a big selling point to those who were existing plugin users, and it was talked about at NAMM.
So you will be able to log into your Neural DSP account. It will check if you already purchased any plugins from us, and you should be able to run it. The ones that we sell as archetypes or branded series like 14, Powered by Mega and Dark Glass, those will not be included in the unit, but if you already purchased one of those, you should be able to have the format to run it in Cortex.
The concept behind this is that all of the virtual amp emulation that you make in a software format is now going to be available in a very high quality hardware processor for people playing live.
Yeah, we will have a big library of devices that people should have, as every modeler should have a list of devices, but we will also create a way to load the plugins that we have done inside the Cortex. You will be able to log into your account, and just your account will recognize immediately what licenses you have purchased from the software, and then you will have the blocks available separately so you can combine them as you want.
So, and even stuff like the 14 amps, which I know has probably been the most successful one.
The plugin, we will create a format for the plugin so you can do it here.
Now let's be reasonable. The language used implies that this is going to be a feature available in the future. There's a lot of it will or it's going to, and that implies future. But this was a big selling point, so we do need to look at it a little bit closer. The clips I've shown are from January 2020, and the Quad Cortexes in the videos, those are the prototypes. But it was said that they would be ready in September of 2020. So it's kind of reasonable to assume that the future that Neural were talking about with the it will or it's going to be, that's more near future than several years later. And it still boils down to, it was a selling point. It was even listed on the Sweetwater website for months. Another feature talked about was a desktop editor. This is a common enough feature now among modelers. It's handy for having modelers on the floor. You don't want to have to adjust presets going down there. You can just link it to your computer and you can do all with a click of a mouse. It's handy for studio use and a lot more. And it also makes a lot of sense for Neural, which is a company that primarily the customers are based at a desktop. It's plug-in based company, so having the adjustments of a Quad Cortex on a computer too makes sense. They even had a picture of this desktop editor on a MacBook, on a phone, on the Sweetwater website. Of course, it was a Photoshop because it doesn't actually exist. The feature was supposed to be released shortly after the global launch of the Quad Cortex. It still hasn't been. A comparison could be made to the many years it took Kemper to offer an editor, but then again, Kemper didn't promise one. Now 2020 is kind of a write-off year for many products, most products actually, being manufactured, and that's fair enough. You're going to expect delays from anything coming from that time, and the Quad Cortex was no different. Its release was delayed, and that's fair enough. It was officially released in March of 2021, which is still 2 years ago. But part of what annoyed some owners was Neural's lack of communication. They didn't really address the reasons for their delays up until June of 2022. They released a statement on it, and it is a rather long one, so it's linked below. But to summarise, 2020 kind of put a wrench in production. Understandable. There was global supply chain issues, and that impacted the parts that they needed to use for the Quad Cortex. It meant that they moved production of the unit to Finland, and many of the employees were kind of all hands on deck in supply chain, trying to source parts for the units. And once they had these parts, some parts weren't the exact same ones that they designed the original Quad Cortex with, so they had to redesign as well to make these parts work with that. A lot of work, understandable. Call 2020 a write-off year, and they didn't have the employees who would have been doing the software stuff at that time. So understandable, there's going to be some delays there. They also talk about the desktop editor delay, and in short, they were over-enthusiastic on the timeframes. They also talk about the plugins not working on the Quad Cortex, and this bit is short enough, so I'll read the whole thing. Making the plugins available on Quad Cortex is no small task. The difference in architecture and embedded software, the operating system running on Quad Cortex versus Mac OS/Windows, means components have to be ported and meticulously validated to ensure they sound exactly the same. Additionally, our modelling approach has evolved significantly over time, and earlier AMP models were developed using methods that are not QC friendly. In these cases, we are implementing many of them from the ground up. We are doing this while modelling and validating new non-plug-in amplifier models for QC. I'm not going to be as charitable with this point. The reason that a feature that was a big selling point 2 years ago, now 3 years ago, doesn't exist is because it's hard to do. That's what it reads like. Seeing that is a major concern for me, because if that excuse is accepted here, it can and will be used throughout the entire musical instrument industry. You're selling and have sold a feature that you have no proof of concept of. None. So that was June of 2022, and it took until March of this year for another update on plugin capabilities. And it's a long one, so it's again linked below, but in short, not much has changed. It's hard to do, and they hope to deliver more updates later in the year. So closer and closer to 4 years since the feature was used as a selling point. And also it does make me question why, when the CEO was asked about porting the plugins in 2021, he said, "Porting the algorithms is quite straightforward and already being done." Really? It sounds like it's anything but straightforward and not being done. This is all while they continue to release more and more plugins, and just their flagship doesn't seem like it's getting the flagship treatment. Take a look at their social media. From July 2022 all the way up to January the next year, that's a full 6 months, Neural's Facebook page didn't post a single thing referencing the Quad Cortex. Nothing. And that would be understandable if the page was inactive or anything, but no, in that same time there were 81 posts about plugins. Compare that to any competitor. Fractal, Line 6, Headrush, Kemper, all of those post near daily about their flagship models. Now in more recent times, Neural have started posting more about the Quad Cortex on their social media, but it is just a bit weird to see just a solid 6-month gap with nothing referencing it. And I want to make clear, I'm not saying the Quad Cortex isn't good. I'm sure it's very good. There are many people who are very happy with its features. It's got amps, it's got cabinets, IRs, it's got some effects. It doesn't have as many effects as the Fractal stuff or maybe the Helix stuff, but it's got effects. And a big selling point was, other than the Kemper, it was the only thing on the market that could capture amps, and it could also capture drive pedals, which the Kemper couldn't do. Even without features promised, they still had an edge over the competition, but that edge is starting to fade. Recently, with the Tone X pedal that can capture things for significantly cheaper than a Quad Cortex or a Kemper can, and with the introduction of the Headrush Prime just a week ago, that can also capture amplifiers. And if anything, it's an indication that the other competitors probably aren't too far behind with that technology too. So if Neural can't deliver the promised features that would still set the Quad Cortex apart from its competitors, Quad Cortex might be in trouble. The reason that I find this topic so interesting is that this is the first time, at least that I'm aware of, a guitar-based product being sold without the promised features, relying on updates. Sure, the Kemper and the Axe FX and the Headrush and the Helix, they all get updates, but none of those were sold without the features that they promised. Some of them have gained features through updates, but again, they've all sort of been sold as is, and if more features are added, that's just a bonus. And while this is the first time we're seeing it, I unfortunately don't think it will be the last. The Quad Cortex is supposed to be Neural's flagship product, but just like with the comparison to video games at the start of this video, if the player base drops, there is less and less of an incentive to keep giving updates. And plugins will generate money far quicker than a free update for existing Quad Cortex owners. I still think the unit has potential, a huge amount of potential, and I'd like to see it succeed, but to do so, it has to deliver the features it was meant to have. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to be happening anytime soon. And the problem with over-promising and under-delivering, even if you deliver eventually, years later, is that it's very hard to win back that trust from the customer bases that funded the product, essentially, by doing those pre-orders at the beginning. So that's the video. Like it if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!